Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we were gonna do a box office breakdown because I am due for one for this past week, though not a lot of new films came out, so it mostly just be updating based on the last weekend numbers and how we can indeed project for films like Spiral. Needless to say, it's not looking very good for that film or a lot of the other films that are still currently out, as many of them have slowed down tremendously this weekend, though of course we've got major films like A Quiet Place Part 2 coming out, and to a lesser degree, at least in my mind, films like Cruella by Disney coming out as well. But as we all know, Cruella is going to be put out not only into theaters, but also onto Disney Plus via their premium platform, of which they never really reveal exactly how well those films actually do. But this bit of news broke just a few hours ago, and it confirms what a lot of us have been saying for a long time, and also it now essentially doubles down on what even people like Daisy Ridley have confirmed for us in the past, that the Disney Star Wars trilogy had no plan, that there was no plan from the beginning. This is something that's been made very clear if you even watch the movies. You go from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, you have two completely different creative visions, you have stories that seem to be retconned even within the same universe, and you have even Rian Johnson himself saying, I wasn't trying to make a movie for anyone else but myself. And it's like, okay, but if you're gonna make a movie in a trilogy, it's kind of gotta be connected to the original film in some way. But now JJ Abrams, the person who rebooted Star Wars, Star Trek, and pretty much every other franchise, and eventually, of course, had no plan, just as we see happen with a lot of JJ Abrams projects, and they kind of fall apart in a lot of different ways. We now also have him confirming that this indeed also had no plan, which in my mind puts, once again, the focus and spotlight back onto people like Kathleen Kennedy, who is running Lucasfilm seemingly with no creative vision and with no idea. Now, we are people who are, people in the Fandom Menace, Geeks and Gamers, all these other groups, right? We've been saying this for a very long time. We have noted this for a very long time, that the vision has never been very clear, and a lot of that has to be blamed on Kathleen Kennedy, as she is the head of Lucasfilm. But when you now have a, high-profile director like JJ Abrams also admitting to this very fact, I don't know. It seems like Disney would be a lot more smart, and we all know that they are not really a smart bunch over there, if they were to let her go and let someone else who actually is a little bit more competent, especially from a creative direction, actually take control. But we all know that's probably not going to happen because Disney doesn't care. Kathleen Kennedy has a lot of power, and we've been saying for a long time that she was on the chopping block, and yet she has still somehow survived nonetheless. So let's look into this story at IndieWire.com, and we'll just read a little bit of the story because, as we all know, Access Media shills are stupid. JJ Abrams successfully launched the most recent Star Wars trilogy with The Force Awakens, but what followed in the subsequent two sequels proved far more divisive for fans. And so let's just stop right there. One can argue that from a financial standpoint, Force Awakens was a success. Again, the film made over $2 billion at the worldwide box office. It got a lot of people excited for Star Wars again. Obviously, there are people who've had issues with the new vision of Disney Star Wars from the very beginning, but I would argue that a lot more people in general were very supportive of that first initial go around with The Force Awakens, saying, hey, there were some issues with the story, there were issues with the plot, this character Rey isn't really all that compelling, but hey, they have two more films that they say, because it's going to be a trilogy, to flesh out the character, make us actually like the character, buy into the character, maybe have her get some training, and then maybe, just maybe, things will get better. And of course, we know, because of the history, that we got The Last Jedi, where none of that happened, and in fact, we went on random journeys and stories that really had no relevancy to the story whatsoever, and ended up getting pushed more with random powers that made no sense, and random story arcs that, again, pretty much led to nowhere, much thanks to Rian Johnson. But I go back again to say, Rian Johnson's story would never have seen the light of day had it not been greenlit by Kathleen Kennedy. Remember that she was the one that allowed Solo: A Star Wars Story to shoot 80% of the movie before firing Lord and Miller because the vision didn't match up with hers, all to bring Ron Howard on to reshoot most of the film, and then balloon the budget, and then lead to the film being a massive $100 million loss for Disney. And so we know that she has the power and the ability to do these things, but apparently she just makes them at the wrong time. She fires the wrong people by firing people like Lord and Miller, who went on to, I believe, that year or the year after win an Oscar for one of their animated films. But then also, too, she kept on and agreed with and worked very well with, apparently, people like Rian Johnson, which is why when people say, and I'm one of them, that the Rian Johnson trilogy is dead, I say, as long as Kathleen Kennedy is still in charge, we all know that she is a fan of his because he'll do whatever she wants and vice versa, it seems. And so, therefore, I would not be surprised to see a trilogy of Rian Johnson's in the Star Wars universe if she is still the one who is in power. Though, of course, again, right now, there is no talk of that trilogy, and so I believe it's dead in the water based on reporting. But as I said, many people said, because they had proof, that they had the contracts, that they had inside sources, that Kathleen Kennedy was going to be out a year, 2 years ago, and here we are, several years later, and she is still very much in power. And again, lots of other behind-the-scenes rumors from unverified sources have tried to make various other claims, but all we have is what's right in front of us, which, in this case, is JJ Abrams, talking about how basically she has no creative vision, and that's something that we've been saying for a long time. And it's good that the shill access media is finally starting to wake up to this fact. And it's amazing when you look and see how they write about Star Wars now versus what they wrote about and how they wrote years ago when The Last Jedi was out and they were saying it was the best Star Wars movie ever, and they were defending it, and they were calling out people by calling people different names and basically being very attacking towards the fans, right, towards the hardcore fans, the fandom menace people and other groups that grew out of that frustration with the way that the universe had been put forward and how they made fun of them. And now all of a sudden, since The Rise of Skywalker, it was a little bit of a bridge too far for them. I remember when those early reviews came out, they were still somewhat positive, but not as positive as they had been in the past. And now at this point, most people universally agree The Rise of Skywalker was just an atrociously terrible movie, though they will still hold on and defend The Last Jedi. But we do see, again, they're starting to chip away at the history that they themselves tried to put forward when they defended The Last Jedi to no end, by the fact that they even admit that it was divisive and not bringing up the man-baby talk and trolls living in their mother's basements, the typical insults that were thrown around by the media beforehand. It goes on. Creative handoffs took place between Abrams and The Last Jedi filmmaker Rian Johnson, and then between Johnson and Abrams for The Rise of Skywalker, resulting in chapters that, from a narrative perspective, felt more like constant course correcting than natural continuity. There was never a finite narrative plan set in stone, as evidenced by Daisy Ridley confirming it was never in the cards for her character Rey to be Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter until the production of Rise of Skywalker. Yes, remember that was when we knew, again, directly from the source itself, publicly, from an actual source that we can see and an actual source that we can actually trust, because she was a star of this movie, that, again, they had no plan based on the very fact that one of the big plot points of her being, the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine came out of nowhere, was never in the cards from the very beginning, and now JJ Abrams himself saying the same thing. Let's go ahead and read from that interview that he gave with Collider, another Access Media corporation. It says, in a recent interview with Collider, Abrams was asked to weigh in on the creative handoffs that came to define the narrative storytelling of the recent trilogy. Would the three movies have benefited from a concrete narrative plan set from the beginning? This is the question Collider asked the director, to which Abrams admitted that, quote, there's nothing more important than knowing where you're going, end quote. However, Abrams said there are always storytelling curveballs that need to be considered. Oh, okay. Is that how you're going to defend it? He says, quote, I've been involved in a number of projects that have been, in most cases, series, that have ideas that begin the thing where you feel like you know where it's going to go. And sometimes it's an actor who comes in, other times it's a relationship that, as written, doesn't quite work, and things that you think are going to just be so well received just crash and burn, and other things that you will think, oh, that's a small moment, or that's a one-episode character, suddenly become a hugely important part of the story. I feel like what I've learned as a lesson a few times now, and it's something that especially in this pandemic year working with writers has become clear, the lesson is that you have to plan things as best you can, and you always need to be able to respond to the unexpected. And the unexpected can come in all sorts of forms, and I do think there's nothing more important than knowing where you are going. Yes, it is. It's very, very important. He concludes by saying, you just never really know, but having a plan, I have learned in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up. You don't know what to emphasize, because if you don't know the inevitable of the story, you're just as good as your last sequence or effect or joke or whatever, but you want to be leading to something inevitable. Based on Ridley's reveal that Rey's parentage shifted over the time of the Star Wars saga, it's clear that the most recent Star Wars films were never leading to something inevitable. Instead, they were leading towards something that just wasn't figured out when the began. Abrams recently said he is planning to tackle some original material in his next gig, and so seemingly leaving Star Wars behind. But with all that being said, he doesn't go out and say, so just to call out, I guess, the news source here, and I'm sure there's tons of videos that are going to be brought out about this as well. Again, there's maybe parts of the interview that are being left out, that he doesn't really answer the question all that much. I mean, obviously, you have a lot of stuff coming from IndieWire and Collider, right, about the narrative shifts and about the creative handoffs and about knowing where things are going, but he doesn't really shift any blame on anyone, right? Obviously, JJ Abrams wants to stay in the good graces of people like Kathleen Kennedy, of like Rian Johnson, because obviously they probably are going to work or want to work together with each other in the future. But it is interesting nonetheless that they are trying to plan this as by saying, when asked about Star Wars fumbles about having a plan, but he seems to be talking in a more general sense about having a plan in this capacity. I don't know. I just find that quite interesting. It's one thing to read a headline. It's another to actually read the words that are being said, and you start to realize just how the media likes to shift things to try and get clicks, even when the story may not be there. That all being said, since we do know as a fact that the creative storytelling elements in the sequel trilogy do not match up, and since we also know, based on what Daisy Ridley herself mentioned, that the story was changing constantly and that the end result was not planned from the beginning, it does show, especially with having creative handoffs between Abrams and Johnson, that there was no concrete plan that was going to be consistent throughout the entire series, which I find just incredible. The fact that you're going to have a multi-billion-dollar franchise without a concrete narrative that you have set from the beginning, because JJ Abrams makes a good point, right? There are some times, especially in series, when curveballs come through, an actor quits, a small character becomes very popular, and you're told by the producers, the people with the money, we want you to make this character more apt, or maybe you desire it yourself, and so therefore changes need to be made. But it seems to me that the kind of changes made throughout the entirety of this single trilogy, right, confined to itself, the fact that the story element doesn't line up, and the fact that characters are contradictions of each other based on what film that they are in. If you go back and watch films like The Force Awakens, seeing what it set up, what it insinuates, and then what the end result is, you start to realize that there was no plan, and if there was a plan, it wasn't a very good or well thought out plan. And once again, you go back to the sources there, people like Kathleen Kennedy, who, remember, said also there was no source material to make these films off of in the first place, that you would have to then go to her for the blame of not having something tied down right away, not holding Rian Johnson's feet to the fire to make sure that it was in continuity, and also to seriously fire that story group, who at this point, all they have done in any real sense has been to say that the Star Wars EU novels are non-canon, right? So that they are officially non-canon, and stipulate which ones they do consider canon, all the while ignoring some of the major mistakes that have been made, even by people like Dave Filoni in shows like The Mandalorian, or like Clone Wars, or now with The Bad Batch, where you have even Star Wars official Disney continuity being contradicted. All really goes to the top, and clearly she is not doing the job that she should be doing. And if it was, again, a business that I was in charge of, that I had a decision to make in, I would say, you're not doing your job effectively, it's time to go. But as we all know, that's not how Hollywood works. In the end, Hollywood is all about influence. It's all about money, how much you have, how much you can influence in others, and how much maybe that you can keep from others if you were to be put in a certain position, which is why I think people like Kathleen Kennedy have stayed in her position as long as she has, because she obviously has a lot of power, has a lot of control, has a lot of influence, and has a lot of connections, because after the rise of Skywalker, anyone else in that position likely would have been fired if they didn't have those same connections. But anyway, those are just my own thoughts. What are your thoughts about this? Do you think that some people are maybe pushing this a bit too far? Again, Abrams doesn't actually specifically call out anyone by name, and he doesn't specifically say that the Star Wars stories didn't have any origin point. He kind of more so alludes at it, since it's being said within the context of the Star Wars franchise. And so I do believe that when you take all of that into account, it's clear that he is talking about Star Wars. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comments section below. And again, I do plan to try and get a more robust box office breakdown out for y'all guys before this coming weekend. And I do hope to be able to see A Quiet Place Part 2 as well. But we'll see how things go Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, smash and light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. And also, before I go, I do want to say and give a huge shout out to Washington Madranda for being the newest Patreon member. And since we only have a few days left in May, probably won't be able to add you to the official video, but I will shout you out, because that is what you deserve. Next podcast episode coming up with John Flickinger tonight. We are recording it, so get your questions in as soon as you can. By the time this video is seen by you, it may have already been recorded. And again, that's for my Keeper of the Bifrost people and up on YouTube, Subscribestar, and Patreon. You guys are amazing. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my Patreon and Subscribestar members for the month of May. Ali C83, Andrew Hoyle, Biffer the Hobbit, Brian P, Dion, Divx, Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura the Modern Major General's Story, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mike Jackson, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Chat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Odin, Steve Glasker, Miss Martin Muses, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B. Thank you all very much for being my Patreon members this month. I really always appreciate you. And to my Subscribestar members, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stand For, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss, the new number 2, J-Rod, the Beer Guru, Nevadanji Adams, and ZK Man. Thank you very much for supporting me on Subscribestar. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every video and live stream, please consider joining on Patreon or Subscribestar. And if you join at some of the higher levels, you get access to things like giveaways, where every month I do giveaways of 4K titles, steelbooks, and Blu-rays. And again, more information can be found over on Patreon and Subscribestar. And at the higher levels, you also get access to an exclusive bi-monthly podcast. Depending on our schedules, we at least get one long podcast out. We try and get 2 podcasts out as often as we possibly can every single month with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. So again, check out more information. And if you are at the Chosen of Valhalla level, which is the highest level available, you not only get all of those things, you also get in your first month a free t-shirt and also access to the Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where I have my Chosen on a stream talking, asking questions, answering questions, talking about movies and anything that they want to talk about. So if all that stuff sounds like fun to you, check out those links below and support the channel in whatever way you can. I do appreciate you, whether you are a member, whether you are a supporter on Patreon, Subscribestar, or whether you are simply supportive in general, leaving comments and likes. I really greatly appreciate it. You guys are all amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.